So let's try to weave our way into it by asking this first big question. Is the Christian faith political, Nijay?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is obviously yes, but we have to make a very important qualification. I like to, I even did this in that Theo course that we taught together. I talk about the difference between capital P politics and lowercase p politics. So capital P politics is red versus blue. It's lobbying for your favorite candidate. It's saying that a good Christian will vote for X. Like that's capital P politics.
Yeah, the Christian voters guide that used to float around.
And that's dangerous. That's dangerous for a number of reasons. We can talk about that later. Lowercase p politics, when we define, and you'll love this as, given your classics and patristics interest. So politics comes from the word polis, which means the city. Right? And politics relates to activity, engagement, identity oriented towards the common good. Right? So in the ancient world, I did a word study on the language of giving and receiving because it appears in Philippians chapter 4. Paul says to the Philippians, you engage with me in relationship of giving and receiving. So I did a word study on that. And it most commonly comes up in the ancient world in politics. That when you decide to be part of a city, a polis, you engage in relationship of giving and receiving. Right? So it's actually counterintuitive according to that ancient Athenian kind of mentality. It's kind of counterintuitive to hold up signs that say my rights, my rights, my rights. We could talk about rights. It's important that people advocate for their rights. But the first impulse of a citizen, and actually that could be problematic terminology. We'll talk about that later. I'd rather talk about commonwealth. But the first impulse for a citizen should be about our participation in the polis, in the civic good, the civic community, the common good. So Christianity should care a lot about the common good, right? When we're going to the grocery store and we're recognizing right now there's a supply chain issue and there are bare shelves, and we say, I need to buy 100 packs of diapers or toilet paper, whatever. That scarcity mindset, right? We're thinking about my good and not the common good. Right? So that's a huge difference. When we think my rights, we're not actually using that biblical or even ancient cultural conception of the common good.
That's a very modern, so we're going to hang on that question of how Christianity is political, if it is, which you're suggesting it is, but highlight that for the listener, that the difference between an ancient and a modern sense of politics is very vast. And it really is highlighted right there that we think in terms of individualism, individual rights and liberties and desires and I, me, mine. And then there's this thing like the state out there, especially if you live in the Pacific Northwest. It's like, I don't even know where it is. Back in DC, I guess people are in some marble buildings arguing about things right now. I don't really care. That's the state. Every once in a while, I get a ballot in the mail. I drop it off in the box or I send it in. That's politics. This is my life. In the ancient world, there's this much thicker sense of expanding kind of concentric circles of civic life. That's what the term constitution, where politics comes from in Greek, politeia. It spoke of not only like the laws and institutional organization and order, but all of the customs and habits and forms of association you might have with like smaller clubs and local organizations and places where you would come and debate about the common interests of the community. That's like the Athenian and Roman dream, is that you would have like an ongoing dialogue about what the community's interests are and how they can be served. Hence why rhetoric ends up being so important as this kind of crowning chief liberal art in the ancient world, because you needed to be able to speak rationally, but also persuasively and beautifully if you're going to participate in the political community. Today, we don't have much of that. We have this kind of bare, shorn sense of there's the I, the individual, and then there's like the state mechanism out there making these decisions. And, Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam, the Harvard sociologist, this really important book was kind of highlighting the kind of emptying out of those rings of civic association between the individual and the state and how that actually hampers and hinders our life. So what I hear you saying are Christians should care about politics, but it's not just about the voting booth. Is that right? Yeah.
We have to recognize some of the positives of individual liberty. I mean, we have voice in unique ways now that people didn't have back then. We can't paint a rosy picture of the ancient world, which had slavery and all kinds of other things, right?
Totally.
We value democracy. We value voting. But At the end of the day, I think what we're experiencing now in the church, Joseph, is this extreme form of individuation that doesn't really depend on other people. When I try to share with my students the concept of fellowship, for example, let's talk about that. This would be a really, fellowship is a Christianese term, but koinonia would be a really common term in the ancient world for sharing. But the way I explain sharing is different than many people's conception of fellowship. So when I hear the word fellowship, I think stick around for coffee and donuts after church. And most of the time
I like to do. Actually.
Well, I don't because I'm an introvert, believe it or not, Joseph. And so I don't really talk to people at church.
Yeah, that's why you have all the books.
I have the book and I read it in church and I go home and then I'll interact with people on, social media or I'll text somebody. But we think of fellowship as sharing in the sense that I have 2 cookies and I'm gonna give you a cookie. That's not sharing. That's giving. And giving is great. You should give away the extra cookie, not least because of the calories. But sharing is like, you're my neighbor. You have a shovel. I don't have a shovel. And I say, can I borrow your shovel? Now we're sharing a shovel because you want that shovel back. And there's some risk there with sharing.
Yep.
Right? It's not you go out and say, okay, I'm going to buy you a shovel. It's saying we're going to share that. And this creates this bond of risk and benefit.
Yep.
Right? The ancient writer Ben Sira, in Sirach, he has this great saying that I love. He says, partner with your neighbor in their poverty. Meaning, share money with them, share goods, because then when they're in riches, they'll share with you. And it's kind of like a mutual destiny that you're participating in. Sure. This would be the common conception of civic life. So I like to use the image of the locker room, like the gym locker room, right? This is a designated place. We've all paid dues and now we share this one space. So we're not going to trash it, right? You're not going to leave garbage on the floor because we all use that locker room space, right? You're not going to trash the lockers. You're not going to, you're going to clean up after yourself. Now this, we don't really have a really clear conception of this in the church. And the pandemic's only made that more extreme because now we're in our rooms on a computer, right? On my MacBook Pro and I'm watching from a distance.
Right. Yep.
That doesn't mean I hate technology. There are ways that we can compensate for that. But this idea that we're in this together, to sign up to be a Christian and actually to sign up to be part of a commonwealth means that you receive benefits, right? But you also have to do your part. And that do your part aspect, we test the boundaries of that. We say, how little can I get away with? Now, I'll tell you, I'm probably a bad commonwealth citizen because I don't volunteer for things when I should. My wife, on the other hand, she was president of the PTA. She does neighborhood cleanup stuff.
Right.
She does all kinds of stuff, right? Sure. She is the better model, of it in church, in society, in community. I don't know culturally, I'm not a cultural critic, how we got there. But I'll tell you what, when the Bible talks about being a good citizen or member of a commonwealth, it's actually going to push our buttons in getting us to think more about how we contribute to the community.